Welcome to the Hub. This is one of the locations where the Festival de Bande Dessinée, the Montreal Comic Arts Festival, is putting on some wonderful presentations all through the weekend. I do want to mention right away that the presentation today and all the presentations here at the Hub are presented by La Presse, and we really appreciate their commitment to the comic arts and the cultural identity of Montreal. My name is François Vigneault. I am a cartoonist, but today I've put on a different hat, literally an FPDM hat, to present to you guys the work of these three artists who have come and joined us from all over the world, from Canada and beyond. The program today is all about drawing inspiration, and so we mean that in the sense that these are artists who are drawing, and they are connecting with art from all around the world, from the past, from their youth, anything that you might imagine, from film, cinema, painting, and all kinds of other stuff. I had a really nice discussion with each of them about their inspirations, and I think it's going to be really fun to see where we're all coming from. So just really briefly, I'll introduce everybody from my left to right. First off, we have Cole Pauls, who is an author out of the Yukon, lives in BC currently, and is the author of Kawandur and Dakawada. Jeez, Doc Wakada Warriors, as well as Pizza Punks from Conundrum Press. Cole, thank you so much for being here.
Happy to be here.
Next, we have Sara Alfageeh, who is the co-creator of the graphic novel Squire that came out recently, and is a freelance illustrator as well. Coming out from San Francisco, you said?
San Francisco.
Thank you. I used to live in San Francisco also.
Welcome back.
Yeah, not yet, but someday I'll go. Sarah, thank you for being here.
Happy to be here.
And then finally, all the way from the Southern Hemisphere, we have Fábio Moon, who has come up from Brazil, the co-creator of many, many works, including Two Brothers recently, as well as the acclaimed Day Tripper. Fábio, thank you for being here.
Hello.
So, and I'm going to be scrolling through images as we go along. And you'll see that oftentimes I'll have an image that one of the authors has told me was from a work of art, a book, or something like that was inspiring to them. They are not in any particular order, although they're just generally connected. So I might be just scrolling through them. But if we talk about a specific thing, I'll probably roll back to it. Kind of a little art history lesson here. So... Cole, maybe I'll start with you, because
Sure.
You mentioned a book that I actually had a really hard time tracking down, and I can find an image from it here. Can you tell me a little bit about this book? I've read in some other interviews with you that this is a very special book to you.
Yeah, okay. So Chris Cadwell's Alsac ABC book. It was a children's book that I read at a very young age, and it's literally an ABC book about my home community, which is in the Alsac Valley. And when I was a child and I found it, I couldn't believe it that there was a book like about the community I was from, because my community is 800 people. Haynes Junction is a very small place. So the fact that someone made a book about my town, it just blew me away. And then Chris Cadwell is kind of like a household name in the Yukon. She's kind of like the quintessential freelance illustrator. And her work is like in hockey arenas, it's in elementary schools, it's in hospitals. She's commissioned for like anything and everything. And so I grew up with her illustrations for like our high school mascot, and like all the other mascots in the Yukon were all drawn by her. So that book, I really saw myself in it, and also just like her career was something I really aspired to have.
Okay, really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun to track down because, like you said, a household name in your area, but was quite difficult to find. I was like, okay, I found a copy of it, and it was really interesting to see that.
Yeah, it's only gotten 2 printings, and it's because she painted a girl running with a rifle, and it's not fire safe. So it's never been reprinted. That's the one reason why it won't get reprinted, is because that one illustration is not how you should run with a rifle in your hand. But besides that, yeah, it's super gorgeous. And Chris, she self-published like a hardcover coffee table book of all of her illustrations over the last like 40 years, and it's amazing. If you can get a copy of that, you should get it, because all of her other books are impossible to get, but the art book is accessible.
It's cool. Sara, were there any, I don't know if you mentioned any, but I'm just curious, were there any works that you connected with early in your life when you were young that made a big impression on you?
Yeah, I think the first work that I can point to was part of that list I originally sent you. And it was Calvin and Hobbes, actually, was, I think, a very impressionable book for a lot of people. Getting to go to the library and stacking, getting a stack of books that went taller than my head and bringing those home and devouring them. That was my weekend routine. And it's interesting is that I didn't start drawing until my very last year of high school. I had no idea I was going to become an author and artist as a kid, which I feel like is very unlike most folks. Most folks saying, since I could hold a pencil, I've been drawing. That wasn't my case. And I needed to see a really compelling example of work that were by people who identified like me to even be convinced, like, oh, this is a job for me. So it went from first loving comics and loving books because of Calvin and Hobbes, which is so funny, so gorgeous, and sincere of a series.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people forget that it's not just, the funny haha moments. It was a very beautiful book. But then I didn't get convinced that I could draw until Ms. Marvel Volume 1 came out, and I was first year in college.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So it took quite a bit of time for that to be in my brain, for me to connect the two together.
For people who don't know Ms. Marvel, why would that have that connection?
For the non-superhero readers, Ms. Marvel is a relatively newer superhero that came out in about 2015, and she was the first Muslim American superhero to have gotten really mainstream attention. And it's kind of exploded in popularity since then. And when I got my hands on the very first volume, it really changed the trajectory, not to be dramatic, but of my life.
Sure.
I didn't know that I could make comics, that anyone was going to be interested in comics that had people that looked like me. And it's all been history since then.
That's very interesting. I think that's one of the most concrete examples I can see of that concept, that representation matters, and seeing yourself in the media, and also seeing yourself in the creators, So I think that's really interesting. Fabio, when you were younger, you grew up in Brazil, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
What kind of media and cultural things were connecting with you when you were younger?
When I was younger, the one thing that's kind of different from the American market is that the biggest comics in Brazil are for kids. So the books that, like the comic books that come out every day, they are for kids. And so every kid in Brazil kind of learns how to read with comics and are exposed to comics very early. But I wasn't so interested in comics when I was really young. I was just interested in drawing.
Okay.
Because drawing was something that I did with my twin brother, and that create, like, drawing is that magical thing that I can do with my brother. Instead of having like a secret language, we had drawing. So everything that had drawing interested us, like Barbie dolls or diaries with like little drawings and anything, any kids' books, illustrated booking, everything. But only when we were growing up, when we started being interested in stories. And then that led to us to discover comics that had stories, and how the stories made us, more than the drawings, the stories made us relate to the characters and want to be part of that. And that was something that we were finding not only in comics, but in books and in movies and it was like, the stories that we want to happen to us in our lives, but don't, because we're shy and we're drawing all the time. But they happen in the movies and they happen in the books, and when we saw them happening in comics or in kids' books, it was, this is interesting. I can relate to that. and I want to make people feel the way I'm feeling when I'm having these feelings, I'm having these experiences.
Exactly. And it sounds like you start as a child with an interest in the surface, and that can be anywhere. And it's true. I remember. I think we're about the same age, and it's a little different. Like print culture was just different. There was less visual information for us in all these different places, and so I would like look at like a little cartoon or like a little thing on a cereal box or something, and you just put all your energy into it. But I find it really interesting, and this dovetails in with what you were saying to me in our email together, which is you had a big list of movies and things like that, and it was always like the narrative. The narrative was what was pulling you into the story, and the narrative is a big inspiration for you.
Yeah, because another thing that I like, when she said that she really liked Calvin and Hobbes, the reality of long stories where you can develop the characters, it's not a long history in comics. Even like the European albums, they're like 48 pages, they are 50 pages, and monthly superheroes didn't really develop characters. And when I was young, and for a long time, bookstores where you can find comics at all times only had reprints of comic strips. And like the graphic novel is something that came up at the end of the 90s, that's established as like, let's do big books where you can develop characters. So before that, I saw that development and that power of following a character's story and relating to that and wanting to know that. I found that in movies and in books, and especially in movies as I was growing up, because there were more offer, and it had the visual impact that a comic also has. So I could relate to the Goonies, and I want to be like I want to have a bunch of friends and go do adventures, or I wanted to create worlds like the kids in the Never-Ending Story who finds a book and the book takes him to a magical place, and
it's that escape.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you were saying, like, I had to look elsewhere. I had to look at books and movies for the long-running story. Because for me, I left American comics and I picked up Japanese comics because they had that tradition as well. You know, comics could run for decades and a character could develop over decades. And that was a lot of inspiration to me as, you know, a storyteller and an artist together.
Yeah,
where
but they were
you
not.
can take your time with
they
it,
were
yeah.
not there yet outside of Japan for a lot of places. Like manga really exploded in the US and in Canada like in the mid 90s. So the age where you're most impacted by how you like this creates such a big impression in me, it's when you're younger. When I was younger, there was no manga in Brazil. Yeah. They tried to publish Lone Wolf and Cub at a certain point, and they didn't even do like the first 300 pages, and it was canceled. So it took a while for manga to really come, and you, a much younger generation, now you have this access to this different type of storytelling.
It was all the internet. You were talking about the only cartoons you'd see is like from a book, from a cereal box. Yeah. I was lucky that, you know, I had that early internet at the time, and I was reading, you know, illegal scans of manga all throughout my childhood.
What? Did you just admit to a crime on stage?
Yes.
That's crazy. Scoop.
I actually found Squire on an illegal scan website, and I was like, the
You made
future. Yeah, I made it as an author.
It's
Someone
come full
wants
circle.
this book.
It's come full circle. You got to give back to the community.
Exactly. I can't be mad.
I don't, if we're talking about like books that really influenced us as a teenager, it was the 3rd volume of Scott Pilgrim that came out. And I read it and I realized that like comics could be fun and they weren't like boring superhero comics anymore. And then I went to my comic shop, Titans in Whitehorse, and I asked, what should I get next? And my friend Sean, who owns the shop, he told me to buy Day Tripper. So I bought Day Tripper when I was like 15, and it like wrecked me. It like totally destroyed me. And I was like, comics can be like this. Like After I read Scott Pilgrim, I went to Day Tripper, and it was like this huge, like, you know, it was like night and day.
All it takes is one depressing comic, and
Yeah.
you're like, they're good, actually.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know. It feels pretty cool to be on stage with you after, you know, one of your books really fucked me up at a young age.
I love that idea too, that there is something that there's something with this idea of drawing inspiration, because I mentioned in the panel description, you know, no creator of comics is an island. You know, every single time we put a pen to paper, we're connecting and reconnecting with this whole palimpsest of like layers on layers on layers of creation and art, you know. And so for you to be connecting with Fabio's work, and Fabio to be connecting with, say, you know, Joe Shuster or Will Eisner or something like that. And then it all is always going backwards in time. And the interesting thing, too, is that this medium of comics is such a young medium that all the history is happening so fast for us, right? Like that, like we're different ages on this stage, but it's not like one of us is like a million years old and the other one's a newborn baby. You know, we're relatively close.
I feel like a million years
gonna say,
old listening
Fabio
to them.
makes me feel like an infant.
He's playing it up. I can tell. But it's just changing, you know, like the world has changed so much, and that art form has changed so much in our lifetime. I think about that often. I'm like, wow, I'm like pretty lucky that I have been connected with this medium that has been so vibrant and changing in our lifetime. And all these things have opened up, like Fabio was saying, the graphic novel, the idea of like these longer stories, like you were saying, Sara, connecting with multiple cultures, with manga and everything like that. It's and then also, Cole, for you, that like the stuff is available, right? Like that there's a store in Whitehorse, you know, like there might not have been like 10 years before, you know.
Yeah, it was called Wizards, and then it shut down. And then the guy who used to help run Wizards made his own shop called it was Geckos, and then Titans.
And what was the Wizard?
Oh, it was like in Hogan's. It was in Hogan's Mall, and that's where I bought all my Pokemon cards as a kid. And I got my first Spider-Man issue with Todd McFarlane.
Oh, nice.
At that shop, yeah, I still have it.
Very good. So we were talking about comics as a medium, but I asked all of you to also reflect on other mediums that influenced you. Fabio, you've already mentioned some of the films that you were interested in, and we're going to come back to that. But maybe, Sara, you could talk about some of the other media that influenced you.
It's going to be a surprise to us both. I forgot what I sent you.
Let me see. Let me find you.
Oh, there we go. Okay. So for me, I was very, very inspired with the actual history of the Middle East, particularly, you know, the Ottoman Empire. And the story behind Squire is, you know, after me and Nadia, my co-creator, decided this is the book we wanted to tell, this fantasy world set in this alternate history Middle East, I had to go to the current history Middle East to go find out, you know, what I was going to draw. So I hijacked the family vacation. We went to Istanbul in Jordan, where my family is from, and I forced them to pull over the car. My dad's here in the audience. He can admit to this. I made them pull over the car and take a picture every time we had a cool sunset, every time I needed, you know, a picture of a crumbling pillar. And I also looked to how people in the past did the same thing. We had French painters like Jean-Léon Gérôme who would come to the Orient, right? They would sketch a few things, they would go back home and make some stuff up. I did the same thing, but hopefully less racist. So that was my goal with Squire as well, because there's so much magic and fantasy and imagination in these real places. No one is surprised when you find out, you know, Game of Thrones was shot in Europe. We all know that the hobbits are from New Zealand. Like, why can't we suspend imagination when we talk about Petra, when we talk about these Roman ruins that we have in the Middle East as well? So it was really important to me to go to the actual place where my story was being set and be there the same way that my character would look around and be awed by it. And also look to the history of how this place has been depicted and understand that there is a lot to learn as an artist and a lot to admire, even if I don't have to take the content of the paintings, you know, just on glance. Yeah. So I have a lot of respect for that tradition, even if ultimately Orientalist paintings harmed, I would say, the image of the Middle East.
Cole, how about for you? Or were there any other? I know you've mentioned a couple to me, but were there any other things that were outside of comics that were a big influence on you when you were coming up?
Yeah, I mean, so Dakwada Warriors is named after the Dakwada Dancers, which is the traditional song and dance group that I was a member of for the first 16 years of my life. So I was really involved with traditional storytelling and dancing, and just like going to powwows and going to lots of potlucks. So just being like raised in that environment and then thinking it's like normal because that's like all you know. I feel like that really shaped about how I want to make my comics and how I want to tell my stories, because I'm kind of like you, where I like to absorb everything that's like about like Canadian comics or like First Nations in Canadian comics, because then you realize like what you like and what you don't like, and the things to like, attach and cling on to, and things to avoid in your own work. So yeah, I'd really try to like absorb everything that's happened before me, and also like what could happen after me, and just kind of like position myself within the Canadian art world, and also, Indigenous comics in general.
I feel like as artists, we're just like pasta strainers, you
Yeah.
dump everything in and whatever comes out is the art.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, just like, being raised in the Yukon, and just being like, I should make these into comics, and then realizing that like, oh, I had a very different life than all of you, and people like care about that, I guess.
Right, people might not know, and
Yeah.
there's an interest from the outside for that kind of storytelling. Just like Sarah was talking about, like these paintings, the French paintings, and they're complicated, but it's also there's an interest from the outside into seeing the world, and so maybe us through our comic arts, through making these connections and things like that, we can create a window for people to see into those worlds.
Yeah, for sure. And like for me, I just wanted to make comics that I wanted to read as a kid, and I realized like if I wanted them to get made, I had to do it my way, and it had to be right. So I had to make it like as correct as possible. And I think it's one of those things where it's like, well, I can put it in my own hands and make sure it's done right, or I could wait in 5 to 20 years and maybe someone else will do it and I'll be happy with it, but I'd rather just do it myself and make it exactly how I want it to be.
Okay.
Yeah,
interesting. I like it.
I highly relate to that. That is the experience when nothing else out there exists for you.
Yeah, well, it's like I could, there's so many people from the South that moved to the Yukon, and so many people that don't live in the Yukon write about the Yukon, and you always get told, or like, you should read this book, you should check it out, and then I open it and I'm like, that's wrong. I don't like this. I don't like this depiction of the North. I don't like this. I don't like that. So it's like, okay, I don't like these things for this reason, so let's avoid that in my work and make sure that my work is actually really fun and engaging and correct.
I say that I'm an artist because I'm a shit talker.
Yeah.
Because like if you want something done right and you claim you can do it better, you have to then do it better.
Yeah.
So I'm very motivated by that.
Yeah, no, totally.
Fábio, you gave me a really great list of different films, and they were pretty wide ranging. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I thought that was quite interesting, and you've already talked a little bit about broadly why the narratives of cinema were influencing you. But were there any specific ones that you think that had a particular effect on you?
Well, there are two ways that movies made me think about storytelling, and one is because like both the script and the acting, they can show me how much deeper characters can be than what we usually do in comics, and make me think, how can I try to make deeper characters and portray deeper emotions to maybe make the readers have these deeper emotions. And so there are these kinds of films, and they're mostly dramatic films that the acting and the writing is more important. So I picked some of the movies that I picked and sent you were about that, like Magnolia or Scorsese movies or Wonka Wai movies. But at the same time, there are movies that are very visual,
Okay.
and sometimes they're light in the story and they're fun and action packed, like Spielberg movies. And so what I like about those movies is how you can learn how to tell a story visually and how to direct, which is something very important in comics, and it's how to direct the reader's eye throughout the canvas. So they have a fixed canvas and we have a page that we have to make the reader look where we want. And through these more visual storytellers like Spielberg, or I don't know, like Tarantino, or like Paul Thomas Anderson, which has a big mix of good scripts but very visual storytelling. And you learn how to create your panels, how to create your compositions, how to play with foreground and background, and how to build this many visual layers to make your story interesting, dynamic, and dense.
Okay.
And so most of the
They're
films,
graphic novels, but I feel like we have more in common with directors because we are casting, we're designing,
well,
we're editing.
we are everybody. We are, like, in comparing to a movie or something, we are everybody. We are the actors. We have to think about body movement and the expressions that every character will have, and that we are the costume designer, think about what they will wear and what that will say about them. And we have to think about the background. We have to build the sets. We have to think about the lighting and how that affects the emotion of the story. So everything in a medium where it takes hundreds of people to make, we are in charge of all of that. We are creating all of those things in those worlds, and there's a lot to learn from movies and TVs where there are people, hundreds of people doing that work. You learn a little bit from everybody. The same way you learn from people who write books, how to create a sentence that it's longer, or how to be more direct, and everything has something to teach. And because I think comics can do so much more than what we have available, I'm always looking at other mediums to see what I like about storytelling that's not being done in comics, and how I can try to incorporate that to comics and make comics a more complex medium.
Right. You want to push things, and then so sometimes you have to look at what other creators are doing that's sometimes very totally different than what you're doing. I'm curious if there's any artists that have influenced any of you that are just really different, that would be like really surprising for the audience, and somebody who knows your work, they would be like, wow, okay, this is not what I would have expected to have an influence. Sarah? You look like you have an idea.
I don't know. I'm thinking about it. I think like I never try to look at comics when I'm making comics. This is going to sound a little ridiculous, but it's like I don't read anything in my genre. I don't look at anything that looks like my book when I'm making it, because I want to pull from elsewhere. I want to do something fresh, because if I copy someone whose work I really love, they are now my bar. They are now my standard. And I cannot do anything better than what they've created. So at best, I will be a second-hand version of them. I would say for me, I mean, I get so inspired by like architecture just by going around places, and people don't understand like how that could relate to comics, like maybe if you took a photo, but I'm like, you need to see things through your own eyes, and it'll open you up to like noticing compositions you might not realize anywhere else. Even as I'm sitting here, like, oh, this would be a cool shot if I had, 2 cups in between and I framed a character in between them. You kind of break your brain and start seeing the world through panels and composition that way. Everybody's just a couple shapes to me. I don't see faces anymore. I just see a rectangle on a triangle.
Cole, do you have any influences that might surprise people?
I don't know if it like is surprising, but I'm heavily influenced by music,
Okay.
and it really like affects my drawing creativity, like, and motivation. So, like, sometimes I'll listen to something really fast, and I mean, obviously, it's like probably metal because I'm a big metalhead, or punk, which that's not surprising. But the other chance is I'll listen to like video game music, or like sad 90s girl music, like Kato Twins or something. And I just like build up that emotion inside me, and then like I can create whatever I'm working on like with that emotion. But I feel like that's not like that's pretty standard. I don't think that's very shocking. But sometimes I listen to music you might not expect.
I'm a
me
little
to.
surprised. I like hashtag Cocteau Twins fan. That's
Yeah.
good. I have to say I'm a little bit surprised, but I like it. I'm right there with you.
I don't know. That's the singer. I wish I could sing like her. That's every time I listen to them.
Fabio, do you have any influences where you feel like it might surprise people that you connected with that?
I don't know. I think the only thing that I know that maybe people would be surprised is how I like comics with crappy drawings but good dialogue, and most and crappy drawing is a very subjective term, but it's when you are a comics reader, you eventually inevitably grow up thinking that like mainstream or very detailed drawing, that's good drawing, and more expressive, loose drawing, it's not good drawing. But I came to learn how the more loose drawings, they are fast, and they work, and they come out of the way of the words. So in comic strips, usually in comic strips, the drawing is looser and faster, and especially in Brazil, there's a lot of crappy artists that they don't need to learn how to draw stuff. They just need the beats to work, and the drawing it's almost doesn't need to be there. And I think people would be surprised how much I like. There's a Brazilian cartoonist called André Damer who does this very nasty dialogues of how people can be awful, and he has a very caustic humor, talking about everything that's going wrong in the world right now. And his drawing is so simple, it's almost like stick figures, but it's the perfect example of how much the drawing is not really the most important thing in the comic. It's like how the drawings and the words, they work together. If they work, doesn't matter what kind of style you have. You just have to make it work for what you're going. And if you want to deliver something fast, like a joke or a strip, your drawing can't be in the way of the speed of that message. Otherwise, you lose your audience. And so I like a lot of people who draw. They wouldn't be able to draw a superhero book. They wouldn't be able to draw like historical fiction with accuracy of the background. But to make it work with dialogue that has a deeper meaning in the dialogue, you need to let go of all those details and be simple and synthetic and economic. And those artists are that. And so that's what I like. That goes completely far away from how much effort I put into the drawing.
I do a lot of student portfolio reviews, and I talk to artists who, they're about to graduate their art school, and it's always a conversation of like, are you creating the right art for your goal, the right art for the story? Because you can draw in any amount of technical skill, and there will be a story for you. Sometimes it's a bit of a hard conversation of like, I am sorry, you are not going to draw for Marvel or DC, but let me show you all this wonderful, beautiful books that you can draw if you just let go of it and accept it.
I find that really interesting, how our tastes can change and evolve over time too. And we can have a certain goal in mind where we think, oh, this is my lodestone, like this kind of art, and it could be like a detailed mainstream art if you grew up reading Marvel, DC comics, or whatever. But then that can change very frequently over time. Are there any influences that you've had in the past that you now are maybe working actively against? You know, you found yourself like really into something, and then you, in your development as a creator, you push to sort of the next level, and you're like, oh, you know, I've let go of X.
I think I've grew up as an artist when I stopped trying to force myself to draw things I don't want to draw, and accepting actually like my best work comes out of when I'm having the most fun and I'm coming up with all these creative solutions. Of course, at the end of the day, it's your 7th hour working on a page and you're tired and you're sick of it, but like you're still going to be really happy to look at it again the next day. And for me with Squire, I had to really balance like, how much was I going to work on each of these pages? It could have been this very detailed, you know, historically accurate book, but I wanted the fun and the jokes that I remembered from reading my favorite comics, like Calvin and Hobbes, as I mentioned earlier. How could I keep that part for myself that keeps it really fun for me? And then I realized I didn't have to compromise. I could do only the fun parts. It was my book after all. And no one was going to stop me. So, of course, I still, you know, put a lot of time and effort. Like, you have a page like this. I wasn't drawing a lot of pages like this after the first, you know, 50 pages. I realized and I learned my lesson, like, this is not sustainable. But I am proud of it. Looking back at it, I needed it to kind of set the stage for this, you know, fantastical world. I needed the reader to be in awe and to look up at these knights on horseback and on camelback and be as impressed as the character will be. But then as the story went on, I could focus more on just the one character and on just her expressions, or, you know, on a candlelight flickering in the corner. I didn't have to redraw the world over and over again. And you kind of develop that skill as an artist of how to have, you know, economy with your page.
Cole?
Yeah, I guess like I'm trying to just make my work more distinctly Teltan and Southern Shoshone. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people, they see my work and they go, I love it. I love Haida work. I love Haida. And I'm like, I'm not Haida. This is not Haida artwork. This is Teltan artwork. And it's a pretty big, like, it's pretty average for people to just umbrella indigenous art, specifically Pacific Northwest art, as just like one style. And in reality, every nation has their own style, their own twist to form line. So I'm just trying to really make more motifs that are more distinctly Yukon and more distinctly Teltan. So when people see my work, they go, holy shit, that's Southern Shoshone. Oh, that's a Teltan shape, because there are shapes and styles of art that my nation does that literally no other nation does. And when I include it in my work, people from my community go, oh, that's a Teltan shape. That's awesome. So I'm really hoping that I can more lean into that and kind of make my work more distinctly my community and less like more a generic version of like what Pacific Northwest art is.
Do any of you, I'll go through you one at a time, I think, because this is an interesting thing, is do any of you have people who you consider as like sort of fellow travelers in the comics world? Like people where you're like, oh yeah, like this person is laying down work in a similar vein to what I'm doing. Maybe I'll start with you, Fábio.
Or like I really like how Pope is a big mix of influences from every part in the world that he's interested in conveying storytelling. So he started up with like underground American influences, and then he discovered European art, and that bled into his work. And then he went to Japan, discovered manga, and that bled into his work and changed his storytelling. And I think as I was growing up in Brazil, I was exposed to a lot of different kind of comics as well, and so the Brazilian independent scene is part of my work, and that was also heavily influenced by what was coming from Europe, and so I discovered all these different people, and then I discovered a bunch of American authors and the American market, and then eventually I started seeing all this more these different narrative possibilities of manga, of like stretching out the narrative. Doesn't need to be constrained by like monthly books or by short stories in anthologies like in Brazil, and I think and I see in Pope's work that saying like I don't shy away from being inspired by all these different things that are happening in comics, and how can I contribute and put something more, and also the fact that he draws with a brush like I draw with a brush, and that is makes me interested in how you can see that something is done by hand, and it's done by hand accepting the accidents, because the brush, even when you control the brush line, there is the dry brush and the long brush strokes, and you have to be able to accept that you are not always in control, and you're going to have to mix your drawing with abstract shapes, and so he's also puts that and leaves that in the work. So it was really nice when I discovered his work, and I was already like interested in a lot of people who did work with day-to-day stories and relationships and everyday, like Will Eisner, who also works with a brush, and then Jeff Smith also works with a brush, but it's a fantasy world, and it was at the end of an issue of Bone that I saw the first, like a preview of one of Pope's THB, and that's how I discovered Pope. And then I went to the comic book store I went to in Brazil and said, can I order this? This is coming out, looks interesting. It's also very brushy, and since then I even like met Pope. Now we're friends, and all the stuff, like not only the influences are there in the work, but there's this interest in throwing yourself out there, and not only I'm also traveling. I'm also being exposed to different cultures. I'm also letting the different cultures get into me by going there instead of only seeing from far away, and I'm also like offering my feedback to that. I'm also going to Canada, so I can talk to Canadian people and have a different experience. Like having a different experience of Canada from just going to Toronto and now going to Montreal is a completely different place. Completely not, but it's very different in all this, and you see that like in the comics culture, like because you all speak French, you have so much more of a different pool of influences than people from Toronto, which is already a very vibrant scene of comic makers, and much more vibrant than anywhere in the US. But here it has this influence of the French culture of comics, which is like much more similar to Brazil, and one of the reasons why I also decided to learn French, because I wanted to read those comics. And so yeah, he's the main, I have somebody who thinks like me and is going around spreading this comics can be more, and to be more we have to learn more and see more and talk to more people.
That's a very interesting way of saying that, and I think that's very interesting to think about Montreal and culture, because culture has come back in our conversation multiple times, and I find it really interesting that we have sometimes like the desire to look into our own cultures and like protect or define or promote that. And then there's also this mixing of cultures where people are we live in this new time. I'll put a caveat down there in just a second, but this new time where there is so much interchange between the different places. And then what's really interesting too, of course, is that those interchanges have been going on for so long. Since for thousands of years, this place has been like an interchange, like a place of interchange for the people who originally lived here, the people who came here later. And then also, all around the world, Brazil is obviously like a culture that is drawing from so many different places. The Middle East and Jordan and Lebanon and everything is like is in the middle. It's like it's connecting all these different cultures. And I find that quite interesting. I'm from mixed culture myself, so I'm always like, let's bring it all together. I find that very interesting. Sara, do you have anyone that you consider sort of like a fellow traveler in your work?
Yeah, I remember that you had a picture from Saga up alongside my own work, which is always an honor because I was reading Saga and it convinced me to really pay attention to the page and really pay attention to comics as a craft, not just as a reader. And I noticed that she actually does very little on her page, but gets such an emotion out of me. And I'm specifically talking about Fiona Staples, the artist, and not the writer on this series, Brian K. Vaughan. And I noticed she puts most of her attention, most of her focus on the characters, because of course, as readers, we're drawn to faces and eyes, and we want to understand how to feel about a story by looking to the characters themselves. She slows down the page whenever necessary. She breaks the panels whenever the story demands it, and tells you exactly where to look and for how long. And I was really inspired by that and realized it's not about drawing the most intricate environment. It's about doing what's right for your story. So I looked up to her and was very honored when Esquire came up on best of the year list alongside her work, and I was like, I guess it's no longer just reader and the creators all the way over there. Like I'm actually, as you said, a traveler alongside them, and I think that's a pretty special moment. You get to meet your heroes in this industry. They're not very far away. And once you accept your work is as interesting and as worthy of time and attention and care as your favorite stories, it's pretty exciting what can come from it.
Right, that's something I find personally really fascinating about the world of comics is that it's not like Hollywood or something like that. Like anyone that you want to meet in comics, you can meet them. Like any person, like your ultimate god or goddess of creation that you have been looking up to since you were a little kid, or just whoever you think is just the best, you can go meet that person. It's not impossible at all, and they'll be excited to meet you too.
There was 4 years between when I read Ms. Marvel Volume 1, who was created by the author G. Willow Wilson, who, again, was the first time I've seen a Muslim American creator in traditional comics. 4 years later, I was making comics alongside her. The turnaround time is quite fast if you put your heart into it.
Cole, do you have anyone that is working in the industry right now that you look to as a fellow?
Yeah, no, for sure. There's a couple. So last VanCAF, the Vancouver Comic Arts Festival, I got to curate a newspaper called Salmon Run. And the point of making Salmon Run was to celebrate other Indigenous comic creators in the Vancouver comic area. And I got to make this dream list. And in my dream list, it included Gord Hill and Michael Nicole Yagalanis. And both of them said yes. So they're both in my anthology, and I got free copies at the Conundrum table. I have some free copies in my backpack, so you can come say hi to me after this, and I'll give you one. But yeah, Michael Nicole Yagalanis, I was 14, and I went to the Vancouver Art Gallery for the first time. I checked out the show, and then going through the gift shop, they had read Haidamanga, which is his first graphic novel. And it was the year it came out, and it totally warped my mind about you can make Indigenous comics, you can make them culturally accurate, and they're it's fine art. It's not just funny pages stuff. It's fine art. The comic he made, it lays out to a giant totem, And since then, he's written 9 other books, and he's definitely someone who I just aspire to be with his career and just like his attitude towards the art world and how supportive he is to the other Indigenous comic creators in my community. Last week he premiered his new book, and I got to hang out with him over the weekend, and it was like felt very surreal. Because it was like, I've known your work for half my life. I've looked up to you so hard. And now when you see me, you give me a hug, you know? So it's like the coolest feeling in the world.
I think this will be probably my last question, and I might open it up to questions to the audience. I'm not sure if we have the technical ability to do that, but we'll see. Maybe I'll have people ask questions and I'll repeat it so it's in the recording with the with the mic check.
There's a microphone over there for
there
people
is.
to make questions.
Oh,
here.
perfect. Awesome. Oh, yeah, perfect. Fabio, eagle-eyed. That's excellent. I guess my last question kind of connects a little bit, Cole, with what you were saying, which is, we've been talking about the influences that each of you has in your own work. Now, do you as an artist feel that you're influencing the culture, the industry, and things like that? And what kind of responsibility do you feel? And what is your approach to putting your art out there when you know that it can be connected with for good or for ill sometimes? And we can start with whoever's excited. Sarah, you look pumped. Let's do this.
I'm just a pumped person. It doesn't take much to get me going. I would probably say, like, it was so surreal to me because I got the email from my agent just like 2 weeks ago telling me that he was in a pitch meeting, an artist was pitching their book to a publisher, and they referenced Squire as part of the reasons why, like, their book should be on the shelf too. They're like pointing at our work and saying, well, I want a shot as well, and I should be published by you because Squire's on the shelf.
You're a comp title now.
Yeah, which is really crazy. Now people are saying things like Squire meets this when they say pitches. And I was like, what's going on? Like, what's happening right now? So that was extremely surreal to me. But that's always a fun time. I'm in a very unique position where publishers are hungry to put, like, to have more and more Muslim American artists behind Muslim stories. Like, they're greenlighting a lot more of those books now, which is also very surreal. Like, I could count on one hand how many books, and I'm talking across comics and, fiction and kids books, featured a Muslim American protagonist. And now they're greenlighting a whole bunch. And they keep hitting me up to can you do a book cover? Can you do a graphic novel? Can you draw this? Can you do the interior pages? And I have to say no to them. And it's this weird position of like, well, if you don't draw it, we don't know who else to turn to. And so I have to have this ready to go list of like 19-year-olds who I think are up to task. And it's such a new moment in publishing for people who identify like me. So whenever I find anyone who could half draw decently, I'm like, are you ready? Because I have a book for you. Like, it's time. Just hop into the deep end. You'll be okay. I'll walk you through it. So it's a lot of learning as you go.
I don't see a lot of people trying to draw like me, but I see that I made young creators see that everything is possible. And especially outside of the American market. Like, I've had people come over to me and say, you come from Brazil, you're still living in Brazil, but you publish in the US, you publish in Europe, you publish everywhere, you're sent to conventions everywhere. You're living proof that if you believe in your dream, it's possible. Even if sometimes it's not even comics, like people want to make arts, they want to be writers, they want to be poets, they want to be musicians. You just have to believe in your dream and work hard. And my work with my brother, it proven people that if you believe in your dream, it's possible. And that's the biggest thing I think it changed over the years. That there wasn't somebody who was willing to, there wasn't an example as extreme like that in storytelling for people to be inspired by. And nowadays it's completely different because you have the internet. So we are all connected worldwide, and but that, I think that was the biggest shift, and I think that's I see that in the way people are excited about their own work, because they feel seen. They are not afraid to show their version of whatever story they want to tell, their own stories, their personal tastes. That wasn't something that was popular. That wasn't something that was possible when I started out, and now it's most of the stories published are stories that people are telling their own stories, and there is interest in all over the world for people to tell their own stories, no matter where they come from, and I see my career as a part of that shift of making people believe in themselves and go after their dreams, even if it takes a long time, and even if you have to start with self-publishing Xerox comics. It doesn't matter. Like the magic of the comic book, it's not in the quality of the paper, it's inside the story. So it doesn't matter if it's in your cell phone, in Instagram. It doesn't matter if it's a Xerox copy. It doesn't matter if it's in a glossy paper with a big publisher. After the third page, people forgot about the paper and the publisher. They're just into the story. And so we started publishing self-published stuff in Brazil, and now I have like 16 languages publishing my books, and I get to travel and meet people from all over the world, and it's a very exciting new reality for comics creators, and I'm just happy that creators from all, like the newer generation, it's growing up in a environment like that, a vibrant environment that embraces variety and quality in stories.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm a direct example of your ripple effect in comics. Like I told you, I was reading your comics when I was 15 in the Yukon, you know. So it's like your arms, they go worldwide. They went everywhere. For me though, I feel like I see it like instant, like the reaction with my work, because I'm so close to my community. So when I go back to the Yukon, it feels just like one big family reunion, and my community's reaction to my work is so positive. And like a lot of the reasons why I have Southern Shoshone in my work is because I'm working with community members to get the traditional language in my comics. And living in Vancouver, like when I was making Salmon Run, I convinced all my friends to include their own traditional language in their work, and then they did. So, you know, just not only like influencing, you know, the younger generation, but the peers around me, I'm like nudging them like, oh, you should do this to your work. Oh, you should do that to your work. And, you know, once in a while, they actually will take my suggestion. And it's pretty cool to, you know, see a friend be like, I will do that. And then they did the thing. And this last VanCAF, there was quite a bit of Indigenous comics, new creators there, tabling for the first time. And they all came to my table and told me that like my work influenced them, and that it was like a big reason to why they decided to self-publish their own Indigenous comics. So yeah, it's a pretty cool feeling.
Nice. And so the cycle is just continuing, and the influences are traveling down through history and traveling into the future. I think that that's a wonderful note for us to end on. We don't have time for questions from the audience for today, but all three of these creators are going to be available. They're all going to be signing, and I'd like you all just to go down, just one more time, say what your name is, and then where people can find you this weekend. Can we start with you?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Cole Pauls, and I will be signing at Conundrum's table A09, and that will be from 3 to 4 tomorrow. And I think that's it.
That's it?
Yeah.
Nice.
I am Sara Alfageeh. I am signing at C16, so like 2 streets down, and I will be doing that immediately after this, and also tomorrow at like 3 o'clock.
And I'm Fábio Moon, and I came from Brazil. And I'm leaving Montreal after this. I already had 2 signings. So if you miss those signings, I'll gladly sign whatever you have here outside the tent before I have to leave for the airports. But otherwise, I'm just happy if you were curious enough to go look for my books, wherever books are sold, and discover my work by yourselves.
All right. I'd just like everyone to give a hand to our 3 wonderful panelists.